So this is a conference about, well, first of all, just thanks so much for bringing me here. Thanks to Ronan, who's been a friend for some time since he brought me over on a Fulbright fellowship grant when I was in Germany. Thanks to the University of Galway. And thanks very much to Davey and to Graham for helping to organize this conference. The conference today is about the potentials and pitfalls of blockchain currencies. And I want to strike a balance between some serious hope that this technology provides communities new ways to coordinate, revolutionary new ways to coordinate, with some perhaps reservations drawn from my ancestors. Davey mentioned my ancestors were Amish, Mennonite. And I found myself talking to a good friend of mine who was on national radio later on, and he sort of called me this strange thing. He called me techno-Amish, or my techno-Mennonite friend. And what he meant was my focus, my interest in appropriate use of technology, that technologies don't always serve communities well. The Amish are often thought to be anti-technology. They're not. They choose not to use cars because the cars cause them to live further apart from each other, and that means that they spend less time in each other's homes, and that means that the communities begin to become, just simply as a physical matter, further and further apart. They feel that the use of high-end farming technology in the field causes them to focus more on profit accumulation and less time on community and building that. And so that's that tension. It's not a Luddite tension, but it is a tension between the appropriate use of technology and its potential strengths and consequences for communities that I'd like to talk about today. Okay, so first of all, here's the 800-pound gorilla in the room. Bitcoin. We all know what Bitcoin is, and we know how it gets used. But I'd like to open our discussions for the day by saying that it's something far broader, and I'm sure everyone in this room knows this, than simply the ability to trade money from one person to another without an intermediary. And that is that it is a record of truth. Bitcoin, the blockchain, is a ledger. It is a way of writing things down that anyone can contribute to, and that is just terrifically hard for individuals to falsify. So it's a solution in mathematical terms to what we call the Byzantine generals problem. And again, perhaps this group knows this already. But the Byzantine generals problem is, let's say you're one of a number of generals from Byzantium, right, the empire, and you're trying to coordinate to take a city. Well, the problem is that some of you, as Byzantine generals are wont to be, some of you are corrupt. Most of you are not. And so the problem is, how do you coordinate when some of you, but not all of you, are working against the interests of the group? So it's at core, blockchain is a group coordination technology. It is meant to help us as a group coordinate our actions without having to have a central authority, an emperor, to take over and mediate between us. That's what makes it exciting. Never mind this cryptocurrency crap, pardon my French. But this difficulty here with trading money, yes, it's a big deal, but the real power of the blockchain is that it coordinates groups, even though some of them are corrupt, without an emperor. That's the good stuff. It's a ledger. All right, so what do people get excited about then? I'm a lawyer, I'm a law professor, and Renan's invitation to me said that I would talk about distributed autonomous organizations and smart contracting, and so I will. But first I have to tell you the thing that I'm not particularly excited about. So smart contracts, what are smart contracts? Smart contracts, we might consider, I would like to buy a jug of milk, you would like to sell me a jug of milk, let's shake hands on it, I give you money, you give me the milk. We have a contract, and then we have an exchange. And a smart contract is simply a way of automating that. So I would like to buy a new bicycle, I could put a certain amount of money on the blockchain, fund it fully, fund it with a wallet on the blockchain. And then anyone who wants to sell a bicycle can convey the bicycle to me and become automatically paid out of that out of that contract which is sitting on the blockchain. And then from that simple example, we can actually build it into very, very complicated arrangements that are automatically executed on the blockchain, whether they have to do with money or not. They are automatically executed on this database, the blockchain, this record of truth, the blockchain, that is very hard for any of us to falsify, but we can all use it. And I have to say, I'm not wildly interested in the automated part of the blockchain. So I had a smart contract on my way here. Right? It was sort of lovely. I went, there was no human involved. I went, I bought gasoline. They put it in my car. I paid for it with a credit card. It was all robotized, automated, no humans involved. It was intermediated. There's a credit card company involved, but it was perfectly automated. We've had automated transactions for a long time, even between individuals, and that's exciting. And but that's a different area of law. That's the law of electronic data interchange for the most part, EDI, and many organizations do it. I've negotiated a number of the contracts for electronic data interchange, but it's not the driving passionate interest in this new technology. That's not, we've had automation, we'll get automation. Automation's not what's interesting. What's interesting is coordination, not automation. All right, there's a separate difficulty, which is that often technologists get very excited about smart contracts because they would like to replace lawyers, and who wouldn't? And that is, they think that the way to replace lawyers is to have fully specified contractual conditions tied to the blockchain. So you and I can work out every detail of our relationship. And once we've worked out every case of our relationship, if our relationship is fully specified, we can write down, if this happens, then this action takes place. If that happens, then that action takes place. If a third thing happens, then a third thing takes place. And we can write all this in code, which is more trustworthy than lawyers. And we can put this in a program, which is more trustworthy than a lawyer. And we can put that program, tie it to resources on the blockchain, and have it then execute our relationship as fully specified between us. That also I find less interesting. The difficulty here, again, is that full specification doesn't work. The first thing the first thing anyone will tell you is that there are a whole series of contractual doctrines about what happens when something happens that the parties didn't think to put in the contract. Alien invasion, are you excused or not? Hurricanes, are you excused or not? Even the simple doctrine of excuse. When do we let you out of a contract for something that no one thought of? And if no one thought of it, you couldn't have put it into your code. We have whole doctrines saying we're going to clean up all of the things that you didn't think to put into your contract or that you didn't think to put into your code. We clean all of those up with legal doctrines. There will never be a case in which humans can't go to a court and say, this contract was underspecified, we need to open it up again and rediscuss it. And so the two promises that I hear at many conferences, I do this a lot, and the two things that people are excited about are one, automation, two, specification. Neither of those are interesting from a legal perspective, and they're probably also not particularly interesting from a community perspective. What is interesting is coordination. Okay, so what's a DAO, a distributed autonomous organization? Well, on one hand, people might say that it's a fully specified organization. That is, imagine, for example, that we have intellectual property in common. Someone, in this room today, someone comes up with a wonderful idea, and we think, wow, we should really protect our intellectual property in this idea, but because we are community-minded folks, let's make sure that the eco-village gets the credit for it, and so let's form a DAO. And if you guys want to do this, if we have a great idea, then let's go ahead and do it at the end of this conference. I've done it at conferences before. We can set up an organization under United States law. There's actually a neat little club statute in some of the northeastern states that you can use for it. And then we can specify the relationship between the members of the organization using resources on the blockchain. So that if our idea takes off and people begin to pay money for it, we can have all of that money come in through the blockchain and then automatically distributed to different accounts based on whatever adjudication we decide. And if we'd like to coordinate further, we can have our voting work on the blockchain as well. It's a record of truth. It's a database. And so we can say that if we decide to change these rules, we can have voting rules put on the blockchain, decide how we're going to distribute the outcome of our idea. And so we can alter that going forward. So that's what a DAO is. It's an organization that is not run by a CEO, but by a set of specified contractual conditions. Again, the specification is less interesting than the ability to run such a thing, to coordinate an enterprise without an emperor. And so to the extent that we say, can we have automated rules for our club, we can do that already. But to the extent that we can say we can have automated rules for our club, but no club president, that's what's interesting. That's what's new. All right. This is a coordination game. I've said it 3 times. So what do we do then with our new ability to coordinate community action? Well, there's a range of new projects that are coming out using blockchain technology. One of my favorite ones is Truth. People are they want to memorialize, for example, their marriage vows. And they want them to be permanent. Well, one nice thing about the blockchain is you can't alter it. Once you've written to the blockchain, you're not getting it back off. And so people are hashing their marriage vows to the blockchain as sort of a statement of eternity, a statement of permanence that it can't ever get back. I'm much less interested in sort of starting up a business called, Marriage Coin. I'm much less interested in that than I am in us understanding that what's happening is we're storing information, verifiable information, to a permanent record as a way of proving it later on. That leads to another one. So what you used to do when you would send a movie script to a business, or when you would have a new patent idea, you used to mail it to yourself. Well, why? Because you could get the envelope back in the mail, and it would have the post office stamp on it. And so you had proof that you had a certain idea at a certain time. This record of truth, this is something that's becoming very interesting for legal communities. 10 years ago, if you'd have told me that there's a way I could walk into court and say, this is the exact document we signed, and there is no way that anyone can have altered a single pixel of it, I'd have told you were crazy. But the idea that I can take a document, hash it, post the hash to the blockchain, and have a permanent proof that that document was at that state at that time, that revolutionizes legal relationships. We can actually prove who did what when. That's amazing. And since we can prove who did what when, we can prove, this now begins to move into agricultural production, we can prove what came from where when. So there's a startup called Provenance, in which they are following up on the trend for local eating and for fair trade agricultural products, where you can post to the blockchain where an item was processed, what processes it went through, at each stage of its progress through the supply chain. It's a verifiable, provable record after the fact of where it came from and what was done to it. And that moves then into one of the most innovative applications that I've recently seen of agricultural coordination using the blockchain. So you have a problem where farmers are currently right now in a large fight in the United States with the manufacturers of the farming equipment. The reason being that through bizarre United States intellectual property law, which I will not bore you with today, John Deere says with a straight face that farmers don't own their own tractors. Instead, it says that they're licensing them because they're basically computers with wheels. And because you don't own the software inside the tractor, the computer with wheels, you don't really own the tractor. And to the extent that this is interesting to you, I've written a book about it. It'll come out next year called Owned, from Cambridge University Press, talking about the rise and fall of digital property and how to defend basic ownership interests in an age of intellectual property. That's beside the point. The fight right now, though, is not just over the tractors, but it's over the data that the tractor produces. Because you can imagine that if the tractor's got sensors on it and can tell that there are certain weather conditions prevailing in an area, it can make predictions about the crop, which then yield huge benefits in commodities futures markets. The fight's over the data that the tractor produces. The difficulty is that farmers also would very much love to gather data together about what they know about their land, and the next person knows about their land, and the next person knows about their land. They would love to gather that data together, but they don't necessarily trust each other. Sound familiar? It's a Byzantine general's problem. And there are, I'm seeing wonderful solutions being worked out to the Byzantine general's problem where they appear to be able to post data about what's going on within their own farm without revealing business critical information, and other people can then verify that data. Once they have agreed to share it, other people can verify that that data is accurate. And that's a wonderful coordination tool among these farmers. Okay. And for property, I wrote a book about it. Australia has now moved to a fully digital land system. Imagine being able to transfer land or interests in land as easily as we transfer a Bitcoin. There's no reason to have the old, in my home state of Virginia, we have the old meets and bounds system. Literally, the old tree down at the end of the lane. That describes the edge of your property. In Australia, we have a better system tied to geolocational coordinates, and the title is transferable in a single electronic database. But of course, we don't need a single centralized database now if we have a distributed, disintermediate blockchain. And digital rights. We can build, this is the world's first pre-owned digital marketplace. If you ever wanted to sell your used copy of Britney Spears' Toxic, you could sell it through a digital marketplace. Those in the United States have been held to not be legal yet, but we're trying to build them. And voting. There's Namecoin, there's our president. I saw the Barack Obama Plaza coming down here today. But we're also beginning to see voting as a record of truth. Again, a means for which a community can coordinate, even though some of them may be corrupt. Okay. This leads to my framing points for today. Trustless technologies, that's what these technologies are called, trustless. We can remove the need for trust. And if trust is a cost, then that's great. But if trust is a resource, if trust is something we want to generate, then this is my pitfalls portion of the talk. If trust is the resource that we are trying to generate, then I would like to be, I'm slightly concerned about the pitfalls of trustless technology. So we see already that we're all distracted by these devices. Air conditioners in the United States were tied in studies to the disintegration of small town life. People went into their homes, they shut the doors, they would not open, they got off their porches, and small town Main Street life died as people turned inward. And you've all seen the houses in the United States, these now massive mansions that, the houses, McMansions we call them, that take up almost the entire plot. They're almost entirely inward looking. They don't look outward toward the space around them. Air conditioning's at fault. The robo-signing debacle in 2008 that caused the US economy to crash. What was it about? It was about a lack of trust, a lack of information conveyed over personal interactions. People didn't meet with each other, look at each other's finances and say, can I trust you to repay this loan or not? They took a look at the broad economy and said, prices are going up. We'll just make the loan because we think prices are going up. It doesn't matter if you can repay it or not. When I buy a jug of milk, a lot of times we've taken the trust out of that transaction because the credit card's gotten a hold of it. But if I run a tab up at a bar, There is trust involved. That relationship has drawn us together. We have to be in proximity to each other to engage in the commercial transaction, and we have to evaluate each other. Now, whether we do so prejudicially, that's entirely possible. Whether we do so with bias, also entirely possible. We don't do this well, but at least the transaction draws us together. This is the city of Gourdon. And the city of Gourdon is near, town of Gourdon is near where I lived in the south of France when I was a teenager. It's up on the top of a mountain. It would take you forever to get up there. And it's got walls and a castle. Why did they do that? They moved up onto the top of the hill because they were terrified of attacks across the border, actually, across the border from Spain. Walls cause us to be afraid. Their response, but they also cause us to live close together. Gourdon is packed. Every house is fitted next to every other house. I don't want to suggest that technology, that we should just all want to live in walled cities because we're afraid of being defrauded, for example, in a Bitcoin transaction. But communities are social technology. Communities are themselves social technology. And the purpose of the community is to generate trust. If we remove the need for trust, we may remove the need for community. I'm not a Luddite. I don't think that we should all foster attacks across the border into southern France, or attacks on our finances through credit card hacks. I'm not saying that fostering attacks is great because it causes us to draw together in fear. But I do think we ought to be ready to pay a cost, that the cost of trustless technologies will be the loss of trust. So, is a disintermediated community a good idea? I think maybe today we ought to ask whether that's a contradiction in terms. Thanks very much, folks. And,